I'd like to invite Bill Clinton to come forward and light our chalice this morning as we remain standing and recite our covenant. Enriched by our differences and joined together in our search for meaning, we covenant with ourselves and each other to seek truth in a spirit of love, to strive for justice, and to serve others with a joyful heart.
I invite you to turn and greet your neighbor for a few moments.
Good morning. Everyone who is here in person, good morning, and also good morning to those folks who are joining us online. My name is Sharon Victor, and I'm serving as your worship associate this morning. If you are attending the Unitarian Universalist Church of Delaware County Sunday service for the first time, we extend a special welcome to you. No matter who you are and no matter who you love, you are welcome here. If you're viewing our service on Zoom, please remember that you can activate closed captioning if that is helpful for you. And if you'd like to talk with other online participants after the service, there will be a virtual coffee hour. You just need to stay logged in and you'll be invited to a breakout room. And of course, if you're here in person, join us for coffee hour in Fellowship Hall following the service. Please remain seated. It's early. And join us in singing our centering song.
We come here each Sunday carrying our joys and our sorrows with us. Now is the time in our service where you can drop a stone into a bowl of water, symbolizing the way our joys and sorrows ripple through our community and can be carried by each other. I invite you to come forward down the side aisle and go back to your seats through the center aisle. All are welcome. I will drop one more stone for the joys and sorrows of our friends on Zoom and for those who are not with us this morning.
Spirit of community in which we share and find strength and common purpose. We turn our minds and hearts towards one another, seeking to bring into our circle of concern all who need our love, those who are ill, those who are in pain, either in body or in spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. We are part of a web of life that makes us one with all humanity, one with all the universe. We are grateful for the miracle of consciousness that we share, the consciousness that gives us the power to remember, to love, and to care. Amen.
The second Sunday of every month is Share the Plate Sunday, and our entire plate collection is donated to a deserving organization. This month's recipient is Chester Community Coalition. This organization provides trauma-informed support services to families who are directly affected by violence in both Chester and Delaware counties. Their diverse, dedicated, and culturally competent team offers case management and training services with a commitment to client-centered and community-informed decision-making. Please text your donation to the number provided on the screen, or you can donate by placing a check with Share the Plate written in the memo line in one of the wooden boxes on the back wall of the sanctuary. Thanks so much for your support.
Good morning, my friends. I have the Wonder Box today. Yay. All right, and I have to shake it very gently. That's a clue, right? I have to shake it kind of gently, so I hope you can hear what's inside. Someone's criticizing my gentleness. What do we think? Weston? Rock. I love the guess. It's never a rock. But it might be one day, so keep guessing. I can't see whose hand it is. Shout out. Go ahead. Glass. Glass is fragile, but glass would sound more clunky than this, don't you think? Yes, Roxy. A string of beads. Oh, that's a good guess. That would be a fragile thing. Yes.
A clover.
A what? A clover. Oh my gosh, that is so good because St. Patrick's Day is this week and you're so close. In the back, yeah. Wood? Wood is a good guess. M? A tree branch. Oh, we're so close, we're so close. Okay, last one, Lucas. What do you think? A rock? Frog. Oh, yes, I would have to be very gentle if it was a frog. There is never going to be a living thing in the Wonder Box. That would not be very nice to the living thing. All right. You were so close. Although I guess these are living. There's never going to be an animal in the Wonder Box. All right. So I have a red rose and a yellow rose. They smell pretty good. And I'm going to tell you a story about a red rose and a yellow rose. So just over 100 years ago, in Tennessee, in the House of Representatives, the State House of Representatives, a guy named Harry Byrne was there, and he had a red rose on his lapel. And the red rose meant that he was against suffrage. Suffrage sounds like a horrible word, doesn't it? Suffrage sounds like suffering. Suffrage just means the right to vote. And Harry was against giving women the right to vote. And that's why he was wearing a red rose. Now, some people were wearing yellow roses. And the yellow rose meant that they were for or agreed with giving women the right to vote. Because 100 years ago, women didn't have the right to vote. A little more than 100 years ago. So, in Tennessee, at the time, they called it the War of the Roses, because some people wore the red roses and some people wore the yellow roses. Now, at that time, in America, there was an amendment to the Constitution, the 19th Amendment, which would give women the right to vote. And Tennessee was the last state that needed to ratify or agree with this amendment so that women could vote. And the vote was split, 50-50. And Harry Byrne was the deciding vote. But he was wearing a red rose, right? So he was against women's right to vote, except in his other pocket, he had something else. He had a letter. It was a letter from his mother. And the letter said, "Be a good boy and vote for suffrage." Now, what was Harry gonna do? He had a red rose that meant he was against it, and he had a letter from his mom telling him to be a good boy. You're supposed to listen to your mom, right? So, Harry had heard all the arguments. Harry had heard that you shouldn't give women the right to vote because women just couldn't be trusted with that responsibility, and they didn't know anything about politics, and they weren't smart enough. He had heard all of those things. But when he thought about it, his mom knew as much or more about politics than most of the men. And all of the women he knew were hard workers, and they were smart, and they made good decisions. Harry was really stuck. He couldn't decide what to do. So when it came time for the vote, they call out everybody's names, and they go down the line, and it was Harry's turn to vote, and he was going to be the deciding vote. People had come from all over because this was a big deal. This vote, Tennessee's vote, would have made women's suffrage legal across all of America. So this was really important. So they came down to the vote, and Harry, with his red rose and his letter from his mom in his pocket, voted yes. Now, yes, so there were people screaming, yay, because they were so excited. And then there were also people who were expecting Harry to vote no, and they were pretty mad at him. So Harry went and hid. Harry ran and hid in the attic of the State House of Tennessee overnight because he was afraid that someone might come and hurt him because he had changed his mind at the last minute. And people felt really strongly about this. But you know, the next day, Harry went into the State House and he defended his decision. He said, "I am happy that I voted yes for this. I am happy that I gave women freedom from political slavery." That's what he called it. And he said, and this is a direct quote, "A mother's advice is always safest for a boy to follow." So we are very grateful to Harry Byrne for voting yes and finalizing the 19th Amendment. Thank you for listening to my story today. We're grateful to his mom, too, whose name was not listed in the story, and I meant to look it up this morning, and I'll try to find it so that we all know her name, too. All right, it is time for our children to go to their Sunday school classes. Bob will play our sending song through. We're going to sing it together the first time, and then the second time our teachers will go, and the third time our students will go.
This morning's reading is from Olympia Brown, an autobiography. Although Olympia Brown was a gifted and a prolific writer, she found herself to be less than a fascinating topic. Olivia's daughter had to work mightily to get her mother to write her autobiography. and in her 80s, she finally produced a brief sketch of her life, which included this passage about ministry. Olympia writes, "There is certainly room for women in the ministry. It is often said of a preacher that he is a good preacher, but no pastor. He does not call upon his people. This is because one man cannot do everything, and the same person is not usually suited to both pastoral work and pulpit service. So many of the larger churches now have 2 ministers for this reason. One of these should be a woman. Our church papers are always calling for preachers, and if women were welcome and made efficient preachers, as they would be in that case, many women would come into the ministry. But women are not urged to enter the ministry." At a convention a few years ago at La Crosse, Wisconsin, the audience being composed largely of women, a minister addressed himself wholly to the young men, showing them the great advantages of the Universalist school, Lombard University. So I called out, "What about young women, doctor?" He replied that no church had ever asked that a woman pastor be sent, so far as he knew. He then described the difficulties which a woman would encounter, but, said he, "If a woman accepts these difficulties, Lombard is hers." I afterwards showed him that such talk as he had given created a public sentiment against women as preachers. Ministers are themselves largely responsible for the limited number of women who enter the ministry. The churches are prepared by such talk not to want a woman as a pastor. Yet, notwithstanding this discouragement and small remuneration, a number of women are doing good work as ministers, chiefly in the Universalist and Unitarian denominations.
Well, we are grateful to have as our guest this morning the Reverend Olympia Brown. Welcome, Reverend Brown. Welcome to our church. And please, if you could just join us here up on the pulpit. Watch that step. There we go. I want to thank you for being here this morning. It's a rare event for us to have someone of your distinguished abilities here with us on Sunday morning. Thank you so much.
All right.
Are you happy to be here?
I'm very happy to be here. I've heard wonderful things about you all over these years. your minister has told me that you're loving, kind people, and that you love your children as well as your middle-aged folks and your elderly, that you know that it is all of you together that makes you strong and loving. So I'm very, very glad to be here.
Well, Reverend Brown, we're part of the denomination in which the Unitarians and the Universalists merged together in May of 1961. I hope we can take the opportunity of your visit to learn a little bit about our Universalist heritage.
Just let me get my pages straight. Oh, I'd be happy to tell you about myself and to answer your questions. I feel a little humble, but at my age, it's okay to say something about your life.
Well, can you tell us what were the social conditions were like for you, for women, when you were born in a log cabin near Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1835?
In 1835, women had no right to own property and no legal existence apart from their husbands. Yet the law held women responsible for all debts incurred by their husbands. Women had no right to attend public meetings or testify at hearings or run for public office or vote in elections. Yet the law required women to pay their full share of all local and federal taxes and obey all the laws of the state. This is so hard to believe today. In churches, women had no right to vote or sit on governing boards or committees or serve as ministers, but society expected women to uphold such virtues as modesty, meekness, compassion, and piety. The custom of the time directed women to accept the drinking, the beatings, and the extramarital activities of their husbands. This was the world into which I was born.
Well, did your parents teach you to accept this situation?
No. My mother and father, parents, listen up, were both from Vermont. Hosea Ballou had converted them both to Universalism, and I believe you had Hosea here last week. They believed in the universal goodness of all people, including Negroes and women. Although most girls did not attend school, my mother insisted that my younger sisters and I attend. At her urging, my father built a schoolhouse on our farm and went around to the other farmers and asked them to help pay for a teacher. Study was the first objective of our house. My mother made it a rule that if any child was studying, she would not call on that child to do housework. Well, you can imagine we all studied.
Well, in your time, how widespread was the Universalist Church?
When I was a child, one Calvinist wrote that Universalism is the reigning heresy of the day. It is spreading itself far and wide. It's poisoning more minds and ruining more souls than any, if not all, other heresies amongst us. There were over 600 Unitarian Universalist churches, many of them very small. However, there were none near our farm. What I learned from my family.
Well, on another subject, how did your family feel about slavery?
Oh, my aunt and uncle, I'm so proud that they were part of our family. They lived nearby, used their house as a station on the Underground Railroad. Whenever we went to visit, we would see one or more Negroes, sometimes a whole family. They were being kept in hiding until it was safe to carry them on to Battle Creek and then on to Canada. My aunt and uncle helped over 1,500 Negroes escape to freedom in Canada. What they did was dangerous.
You sound proud.
I'm very proud.
When you turned 21, your father told you he would send you to any college that you chose. Why did you pick Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio?
Well, I didn't have too much choice. In 1856, I knew of only 2 colleges in the country that admitted women. Oberlin, a very wonderful music school also, and Antioch. Oberlin placed many restrictions on women. It was narrow, orthodox, and bigoted. Antioch was 3 years old, and it imposed no doctrinal teachings on its students. Horace Mann was its president. He proclaimed that the new college was to try a great experiment, the education of women on the same terms as men. I was not disappointed in the school. Women attended classes with the men, and for a while, we all wore bloomers. They sort of looked like skirts, but they were actually pants. A bloomer was a comfortable dress designed by a woman. It was an alternative to the restricted clothing the traditional culture expected us to wear.
Well, when you entered college, did you have a profession in mind?
No, I just wanted to learn. I wanted to learn as much as I could about as many things as possible. But during my years at college, I graduated and formed the determination to become a preacher. One event sticks out in my mind. We'd had many lectures from such men as Horace Greeley, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and others. But the lectures were all by men. We young women ventured to ask why the school had invited no women speakers. The faculty and administration told us that there were no women as a lecturer that would be as good. I decided to have a woman as a lecturer, and I didn't just sit still. I put up notices inviting women to meet on a certain day in the reception room. When I called the meeting to order, I said that women were left off the lecture program, the claim being that there were no women as wise as the men whom the school had engaged. I said there was Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, and Antoinette Brown Blackwell, any of whom would compare well with the men. I said that what we had to do was to raise the money and select a woman speaker ourselves, take it in our own hands. They all agreed. We chose Antoinette Brown for our speaker, and we proceeded to raise the money immediately. Antoinette Brown considered herself a minister, but no denomination officially recognized her ordination. Your ordination of a person is very important. It is you, the congregation, to recognize someone to be a minister. But because she wasn't ordained, she did not have the authority or influence that we think of ordination as giving. She delivered her lecture Saturday night. I thought we should invite her to preach Sunday at the college chapel. But the school administration said that that was not possible. I then determined to have her preach in the church in town. I proceeded to hunt up the trustees, all of whom lived at a long distance from town. I wanted to get their permission for her to occupy the church Sunday morning. I was successful in securing the church, and she preached to a large audience. It was the first time I had heard a woman preach, and the sense of victory lifted me up. I felt as though the kingdom of heaven was at hand.
Sounds like you really liked her.
Yeah.
After graduation from Antioch, how did you find a theological school that would accept you?
I wrote to all theological schools I knew about, asking if I could be admitted as a student. From the Unitarian School in Meadville, Pennsylvania, I received the reply that they would like to have me for a pupil. However, they were rejecting my application because the Unitarian trustees thought that having a woman would be too great an experiment. Oberlin said they would admit me to the school, but they would not support me in being ordained. But I was intent on being ordained. Realizing that I would not be likely to gain this through preparation at Oberlin, I wrote to St. Lawrence University, the Universalist Divinity School in Canton, New York. The president, Mr. Fisher, told me that he would admit me, although he did not think women were called to the ministry. However, he said, I leave that between you and God. This, I thought, was just where it should be left. So I arrived at St. Louis in the fall of 1861 when there was so much tumult in our country.
Well, how did they treat you at St. Lawrence?
I came away from school with every feeling outraged and my nervous system permanently shattered through the persecutions that I had endured at that school, solely because I, a woman, was seeking a chance to preach the Universalist belief that there is no such thing as everlasting punishment. The professors treated me fairly as far as my work was concerned. However, my fellow students, all of them male, indulged in derogatory remarks about my sermons, which I found hard to bear. The mildest of these criticisms was this frequent one. Well, it was good, but I should hardly call it a sermon. There were two young men who prided themselves on devising various petty forms of annoyance. For example, they would get under my windows at night and mimic my voice, which they found peculiar.
I suppose these young men went on to serve big churches?
Actually, no. Both of them left the ministry within a year of their entrance.
Well, how did you succeed in getting ordained?
Each Sunday, I traveled to a different church in the area near the theological school to preach. Over 2 years, they got to know me, not as a woman, but as a minister. In June of 1863, I went before the ordaining council of the Northern Universalist Association. After 2 years of preaching in their churches, they knew something of my work and character. When the day of the interview approached, President Fisher of St. Lawrence told me that he opposed my being ordained. However, the week before the interview, I had preached in a church in a small town near the theological school. The members of that church offered to call me as their minister. A delegate from this church was on the ordination council. At the meeting, there was much discussion and opposition. I spoke for myself. When the ordination council voted, it was in my favor. That small Universalist church in Upper New York State ordained me as a Universalist minister on June 25th, 1863. I was filled with gratitude and love for them. I was only 28 years old. Never before in the United States had a denomination recognized a woman for ordination, and I was ecstatic.
Well, then, what were the first years that you served as a minister? What were they like? Did they meet your expectations, your hopes, your dreams?
I was getting older, so I understood that I can say yes and no. I briefly served small churches in New York State and in Vermont. In 1864, at the age of 29, the Universalist Society in Weymouth, Mass., if you all know Weymouth at all, called me to be their minister. The church was not what you'd call a plum. The membership was small, and the church had been without a regular minister for 2 years. They were heavily in debt, and to pay their bills, they were about to lease their meeting house as a hall. Also, at first, I was not accepted by their community. Soon after I arrived, the most horrible thing happened. President Lincoln was assassinated. All the ministers in town held a meeting to plan for a town-wide memorial service. None of the other ministers were willing to unite in a service with a woman preacher. So I held my own memorial service for Lincoln with just my small congregation.
Well, it must have been a hard time for you.
It was very difficult. But in spite of the difficulties, I loved it. We paid off the debt, we increased the membership, we restored the building, we installed a new organ. Looking back, I consider my 6 years in Weymouth the most enjoyable part of my ministerial career. I truly love those people.
And it was while you were a minister in Weymouth that you took a leave of absence from the church and threw yourself into the women's suffrage movement. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
In 1867, Susan B. Anthony, who was an active Unitarian, asked me to go to Kansas to campaign for the right of women to vote. Kansas was the first state in the history of the country to place on the ballot the question of women's suffrage. I could not say no to Susan. In Kansas, I traveled by wagon through the hot summer months of July and August, speaking twice a day, asking men to give women the right to vote. The meetings were often 50 miles apart, making it necessary to start at 4 o'clock in the morning to reach the first appointment at 2. After a short stay for lunch and a speech in some schoolhouse, we would start at once to meet an engagement at 8 o'clock in the evening. Often, there were no roads. We were obliged to follow a trail across the prairie, often indistinct. And we often lost our way traveling round and round, not knowing where we were. Occasionally, we would meet a countryman and ask about the distance to the next town, to which we would receive the illuminating reply of, "Right smart," or "A good little bit."
I have a description from the Kansas State Journal of one of your meetings. May I quote from it?
Oh, please.
It describes a speech by a local judge who was for giving the vote to black males, but was against giving the vote to women. You were the next speaker after him. The reporter wrote, "It was expected that when Ms. Brown was introduced, many would leave, owing to the strange feeling against female suffrage in and around Oskaloosa, but no one left. The crowd grew more dense. A more eloquent speech was never uttered in this town than Miss Brown's delivered. For an hour and 3/4, the audience was spellbound as she advanced from point to point. She said the ballot meant protection. It meant much more. It meant education, progress, achievement, and elevation for the oppressed classes. She paid an elegant tribute to Kansas, the pioneer in all reforms. She said that it would be the best advertisement that Kansas could have to give the ballot to women. Thousands now waiting and uncertain would flock to our state. A vast tide of immigration would continually roll towards Kansas until her broad and fertile prairies would be peopled." After Ms. Brown had closed, someone in the audience called for a vote on the female proposition. The vote was put, and nearly every man and woman in the House rose simultaneously. So did you win in Kansas?
No. We lost 9,000 to 20,000. It was the first of many defeats.
And after that vote, what did you do?
I went back to Weymouth and continued to organize. In 1868, I founded the New England Suffrage Association. In 1870, I accepted a call to the Universalist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where the famous showman P.T. Barnum was a member. In Bridgeport, I met a wonderful man named John Willis. We were married in 1873 when I was 38. The next year, when I was 39, my first child, Henry, was born. I did not approve of any of the Bridgeport doctors, so I traveled to a special sanitarium for the birth.
Did you change your last name to Willis?
No. I felt strongly about this. The custom of surrendering one's name upon marriage is a way of suggesting that the woman belongs to the man. It is no different from slavery times, when the Negro changed his name on gaining a new owner, the purpose being to show who was his master. I am proud that I retained the name Brown all my life, with the full understanding and approval of my husband.
Well, how did your church in Bridgeport, Connecticut accept your marriage and your child?
Not well. There had always been a small faction in the church that opposed a woman as minister. After the birth of my son, this faction began to work up its opposition. They called in ministers from neighboring churches to go among the people in my congregation saying, "What you need here is a good man." My parish gave me a vote of endorsement, but because of the division, I decided to resign. We remained in Bridgeport 2 years longer, during which time my daughter Gwendolyn was born. I was 42 years old.
And then you moved to a Universalist church in the Midwest.
Yes. When I was 43, the Universalist Church in Racine, Wisconsin, called me to serve as their minister. It was my last full-time church. I served the church for 9 years, and I maintained my home in Racine the rest of my life.
When you were 52, you stopped working full-time as a parish minister. Why did you leave that profession?
I had to choose. I wanted to devote all my efforts to the suffrage movement. I was president of the Wisconsin Women's Suffrage Association and vice president of the National Women's Suffrage Association. In 1893, my beloved husband died, and I took over the management of his printing business. Women's rights and the care of my family became my two tasks for the rest of my life.
Well, working year after year after year to get women the right to vote with no result, it must have been very frustrating.
Very. It would have been so easy to dissolve into passivity, especially after my husband died. Frustrating is an understatement. To get the word male out of the Constitution cost the women of this country 52 years of political activity. We conducted 480 campaigns to get constitutional conventions to include women's suffrage planks. We conducted 30 campaigns to get presidential conventions to endorse women's suffrage in their platforms. We conducted 19 campaigns with 19 successive Congresses to get an amendment to the federal Constitution. A mirage often deceives reformers. We see distant things near. We suppose that victory is at hand, when in reality, generations are yet to pass before we will realize our goal.
But then, on August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution was adopted. At the age of 84, you finally had the right to vote. It must have been a wonderful feeling for you to walk into that voting booth in November of 1920 after all those years.
I was happy and angry. I wished the others were there to enjoy the victory with me. All the other early pioneers, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, all of them and many more had died. I was one of the few women who had been in on the beginning of the suffrage movement to live and vote in a national election. I only wished that my old friends had been there to savor the victory with me. I wished that my mother had been there.
You lived to the age of 91. What were the last years of your life like?
I continued to attend the Universalist Church, and I became active in a new group started by a young Unitarian, Roger Baldwin. He called it the American Civil Liberties Union. The last year of my life, in 1926, I took a 5-month trip to Europe with my daughter, and we explored the Italian Riviera, Switzerland, and France.
Oh, that sounds like a wonderful trip. Reverend Brown, I would like to thank you for being here this morning and answering my questions about your life. For my final question, I would like to ask you about a study that appeared in the news a few years ago, about a study by the Southern Baptist Convention, which today is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. Now, apparently they conducted research in the state of Alabama, and actually in all the states, but we only have information about Alabama, in which they determined how many citizens of Alabama were going to go to hell. And they concluded that 46.1% of the people of Alabama are bound for hell. This includes all Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, Roman Catholics, and all, of course, Unitarian Universalists. According to the article, the Southern Baptists have national figures on who's going to hell and who is not, but they refuse to reveal them for the article. Do you have any comment?
Oh, these sorts of claims may appear just as simple foolishness when we read about them in the newspaper. But look at Florida. However, as you may know, they can do enormous damage to the spirit of people. Have you ever sat and held the hand of a crying father because he believes that his baby is not able to get into heaven because it died before anyone baptized it? Have you ever sat and watched a woman shake with tears because she has just returned from a visit with her parents, and they have told her that because she is lesbian, they will never be reunited in heaven? Have you ever stood at a memorial service filled with grief and heard a minister threaten you by saying that unless you accept a certain theology, you are bound for hell? I have. As a 19th century Universalist minister, I taught that because of God's love, every human being will go to heaven. Even those who have hurt us the most, in the end, will be accepted. Today, there is still a need to preach the theology of universal salvation. However, as you can see by my own life, Universalism is more than a religious belief about what happens when we die. It is a view of human nature. We taught that God, just as God loves every human being, we human beings have a responsibility to treat every person with love and equality. Universalism is an ethical movement. It is a protest against injustice. It is a piercing cry against every kind of discrimination. It is a commitment to the cause of social reform. It leads out into the affairs of the world. It possesses a social dimension. It requires an ethical commitment to the plight of other human beings. Oh, it's a great heritage, and I urge you to proclaim it without any excuse or apology. This is the religion I leave you as your inheritance.
Thank you, Reverend Brown. Robert will play through our closing hymn, and then I invite you to stand and join me in singing our hymn, Freedom Advancing, by Mary Coburn, written in 1849. Let's join together in our closing words. For those who come here seeking God, may God go with you. For those who come embracing life, may life return your affection. And for those who come to seek a path, may a way be found and the courage to take it, step by step. Blessed be. Let's walk to the back.